Yeah, no, I can't sing. What are you going to do about it? Sorry, can't sing. I've been asked this question a million times. I realized I never made a video explaining this, but I've had people say, how on earth did you end up with such an incredible interest in field theory, metaphysics, like ancient Pythagoreanism, Neoplatonism, which are one and the same thing, by the way. You've been translating ancient Pali now for over 20 years. So interested in Neoplatonism, Plotinus, Numenius, Syrianus. Of course, nothing is known except in the modality. How are these things connected? I mean, that's field theory and metaphysics. Well, when it comes to natura naturans, yeah, of Sophia Perennis, or genuine metaphysics, there could not be, logically, being a smart critter and knowing this fact, yeah? You think that's egotistical? I don't care. There cannot be, definitionally, any difference between physics and metaphysics. As far as field theory, and of course, physics is not field theory because fields are not physical objects. Fields, of course, are ether perturbation modality, just like ice, water, and steam are different temperature and pressure modalities of water. Ultimately, if everything is one, which of course necessitatively it must be, because people think illogically and unintelligently that in nature there's a lot of different things. We got math over here, and we got science over here, and epistemology over here, and it's completely ludicrous. There's no distinction, too, between physics and metaphysics. You know, finally, even though it was blatantly obvious, came to the full reconciliation between light and matter. And of course, light is just a field perturbation modality, super high energy light. We call it frozen light. I called it humorously hard light. You know, so we've reduced out or reconciled light and matter. You'd be like a child who's seen ice in his drink and drank water, of course. And he's like, gets a little bit older, a few years old. I don't know, my kids realize, like, oh, ice is just hard water. You know, these are all one and the same thing. Humanity, by and large, definitely, by and large, suffers from this hyperbolic delusion that physics and metaphysics are two different things, and also to field theory. And of course, I'm not interested in theory, I'm interested in truth. I have great interest in what is logical and intelligent and wise, facts, logic, and wisdom. I mean, the ultimate truth must be one. The reconciliation of these things, even by scientists who have been always interested in grand unified theory. Well, everything, of course, has always been unified. It's that human beings lack the intelligence, the wisdom, and the insight to be able to see things as unified. You actually have to step back and take a look at the forest for the trees. There's a long laundry list which would go on 10 miles long, but I'd like to keep this very, very simple. Principle and the attribute of the one. People, especially religions, which I have no interest in at all, you know, look to original sin, or prima causa. And of course there isn't one from the standpoint of genuine metaphysics vis-a-vis the Pythagoreans, Platonists, Neoplatonists, original Buddhism, Advaita Vedanta. We're talking about principle and attributes. The same reason why the first two digits of the Fibonacci sequence are, of course, 1 and 1. We have the principle and the attribute, like light and illumination, to keep it really, really simple. We have this conjugate reality of pure potential and the manifestation of that potential, which, of course, must be necessitatively the release of that potential, and it must follow a logos, which is also, too, called the Demiurge. You call it the Euristos Dias, we could call it Tolma. The Greeks also, too, called it Ananke. These words, by the way, just like the word logos, depending on context, of course, logos can mean about 100 different things, but if you actually understand logos, it really means one thing, but there's no English word for it. There's no English word for Ananke, there's no English word for Tolma, are divinely simple, and they must necessitatively be simple. Principle and attributes of fields. Well, interestingly enough, and of course my discovery, thank you so very much, no one else has said this. I love when people say, oh, so-and-so discovered that. It's like, oh, yeah, go tell me where Nikola Tesla or Walter Russell actually said these things. Conjugate fields of the entire universe, of course, are the magnetic and the dielectric. They're the negative images of one another, potential and actual. like light and illumination. We could call illumination an analog to magnetism. We could call light, i.e. the principle, an analog to the dielectric of the ether, which is non-Cartesian pure potential. The original definition, by the way, of ether. Potential versus energy. Human beings always have things upside down and backwards. We think of like a giant a mushroom cloud as energy, but that's actually the impotency of energy. Yes? Not energy itself. It's the release of all that kinetic energy of the system, like the fissionable plutonium or fissionable uranium. Self and the false self. The transcendent self and that false self. It would be the same distinction between the signal and the broadcast. The broadcast, of course, is consubstantial, has a beginning in time, and therefore necessitatively an end in time. Just as like life is a consubstantiality of matter and spirit. Yes, the transcendent spirit analogous to the signal. Don't take the analogy too far and ask about the broadcast station, which has a physical location. In the case of the transcendent self, there's no broadcast station in a place of the Cartesian universe in space and time. Rather, necessitatively must be underneath all of that, meaning non-Cartesian, pre-Cartesian. We could say counter space, zero-point energy. We could say the ether. All of these things are completely irrelevant. Subject and object. Primordial agnosis. You know, when we flip a switch, of course, it's taking the analogy too far, and we send a circuit through a lossy system. Every light bulb, whether it be LED or incandescent with its tungsten filament, is designed to be lossy. When we actually send electricity, which is a hybrid, down through the field form of the wires to the light bulb, they're designed to be lossy such that it releases illumination. Of course, nobody sees light. No human being has ever seen light. They only see illumination. So it's designed to be lossy. So what is the lossy nature of primordial agnosis? It's the same thing of the one. That which the one is also that which the one does. Not that the one does anything. But we call this the Demiurge, or the Euristostaios in Greek, or Ananke, which loosely translated means necessity, but it doesn't mean necessity. It means it can't be any other way. This is how we're able to get around all creationistic, let's just use the word nonsense, via original sin. There's no such thing as original sin. There's no such thing as first cause. There is no first cause. First cause is not cause at all, rather extrinsic attribute of the absolute. Same reason why the first two digits of the Fibonacci sequence are 1 and 1. I.e. subject and object, the false identity. Everybody looks in the mirror, typical dumb person, and sees the meat suit in the mirror and they brush their teeth, but that, of course, is not who they are. They think they are that, the psychophysical. This, of course, perpetuates, becomes a snowballs, it rolls downhill and eventually becomes so big it becomes unstoppable. People get addicted to, objectivity, and then people go nuts because they want more, and they think they need to have more, and, they get addicted to something that is never fixed. It doesn't matter how beautiful or rich or how long-lived somebody is. It's a meat suit that's heading for the grave. Although someone talks about how healthy they are. Of course, I know I need to be in better shape, but I make a joke about, the healthiest person on earth that might have been in a car wreck or whatever. Perfect health. Everybody's at the funerals like, oh my God, you left such a healthy-looking corpse. Hurry up, shut the coffin, it's starting to smell. People are addicted to this. And this, of course, this binary system, this conjugate system of principle and attribute, is mirrored at every level in every way. You talk about simplicity being divinity. What if the most acutely simple teaching in the universe would be that there's this conjugate system of principle and attribute, like light and illumination, the agathon and the demiurge, dielectric and magnetism, principle and attribute. They are not two things. It's a conjugate system. You can say yin and yang if you want. I don't care. The same is true of transcendence. Transcendence from what, by what means, how. People are confused. They try to think their way out of a thinking box. Well, embodiment is due to false identity. This identification phenomenology of your belief systems and that which you think you are, which is that psychophysical thing in the mirror. What if it were no more difficult than learning how to engage in THEURGY, disobjectification, via negativa, apophatism, neti. There's a lot of different names for it. and they all refer to one thing and one thing only. Fundamentally, disobjectification. People are like, well, how do I engage in disobjectification? Well, you tell me that. How do you find the subject, which of course cannot be found objectively because it is the pure subject? This is the reason why the word people use for meditation comes from the word samadhi, which comes from the Pali word jayati, i.e. the jhanas, which means to burn. You're burning away objectivity, leaving pure subjectivity. This is what the via negativa neti neti, the apophaticism is about. It's not difficult. It is difficult for someone to wrap their minds around it, like a fish that has no idea of walking on dry land. I mean, they've never ever engaged their brain into that gear before. When I talk about disobjectification, first people think I'm making it up. It's like I give them a million references about disobjectification. A million! Throughout Advaita Vedanta, the Vedas, Upanishads, the five Nikayas, Plato, Plotinus, Pythagoras, the Greeks called it Epistrophe. Embodiment is called prohodos, and disembodiment or disobjectification, i.e. the apophaticism, is called epistrophe. Yes? The universe necessitatively does not make any distinction between field theory or physics and metaphysics. All of these things are the exact same thing, the coinage, the silver of the coinage. This is the reason why everybody keeps saying, why are you so interested in field theory and metaphysics? Like, these are two things. It's like you're talking about two sides of a coin. There's not. There's only the silver, not that this is silver. There's only the silver of the coinage. I'm interested in the silver, what it is, how it is, why it is. The fact that you refer to the face, the head, the side, or the tail side of the coin is completely superfluous, completely pedestrian, completely terrestrial. It's not important. Just think about that. Principle and attribute. The agathon and the demiurge. And these are more just silly names which ultimately don't mean anything, ultimately. But they're words for communication. The principle and attribute of fields. Yes. Magnetism is the dielectric field. Loss of energy or inertia manifests as energy. Not potential, but the loss of that potential, which is centrifugal and force in motion. Embodiment is the same thing. The false identity is the same thing. We're burning a fire of ignorance within our spirit through false identification. We see ourselves as that meat suit, as the psychophysical. Everybody moans the meat suit. Wonderful. Great. That's not who you are. That's the most repeated passage in ancient Pali, by the way. Isokaya namisota. The body is not the self with a capital S, yeah? All forms of metaphysics speak of two selves, by the way. The transcendent self and the psychophysical terrestrial self, like the meat suit. So, the irreducible simplicity of everything. You know, you have to be able to see the forest for the trees. There's no such thing as field theory here, metaphysics. You could eliminate out all religions. You could eliminate out 90% of reading of Plato. People read for, they want the pith, the core, the primer of everything. The primer of everything. Excuse me, I said primer. The primer of everything. You know, Hegel is not bad, but I mean, you have to read 400 pages of Hegel to get one good paragraph of really pithy stuff out of Hegel. That's the reason why I don't tell anybody to read Hegel. I really tell people not to read Western existentialists. The better of the Western existentialists, Hegel, is still bad. That's the reason why the Vedas were superseded by the Upanishads and the Nikayas, and superseded even more still by the teachings of Advaita Vedanta. The Upadisa and the Vivachudamuni are pretty small books. You could read both of them technically in like 2 days if you read them quickly. There's not that much. Within that is everything. You will need to understand the cause of embodiment, which is not cause at all, how to effectuate out transcendence. Every bit of natura naturans, we could say Mother Nature, I don't care what you want to call it, the absolute, the agathon, and the demiurge, is really simple. It's a conjugate system of principle and attribute, which are not two things, rather one thing. Once again, the reason why the first two digits of the Fibonacci sequence are not 1 and 2, they're 1 and 1. which are not two things, but one thing, principle and attribute. Magnetism is just a silly little word invented to talk about the loss of energy, inertia of the dielectric, which we call magnetism. The magnetism is just the dielectric field with completely different attributional properties. And then we have all these other things that come afterwards. Everybody gets interested in all the minutiae, like space. Scientists have reified space as something that does something, has properties, doesn't have any properties, as Nikola Tesla said. Space is just the after effect of a divergent magnetic field. Literally, it's the negative image of eternity. It's literally the impotency of pure potential. It's like space is so vast and so... Well, space is nothing. This is what we learned in science fiction growing up. Oh, space is so huge, it's insurmountable, and we could bend space and warp it, and none of that stuff is true. What's being bent and warped is regarding light and, of course, mutual mass acceleration towards counter space, or what is conventionally called gravity, is nothing other than electrostatic torsion or dielectric torsion. Very, very, very simple to understand. I've only been interested in the big answers. Everybody's lost in all the minutiae. They're lost in the forest, looking at the trees. Well, this is an oak tree, and that's a walnut tree, and well, who cares? I'm interested in rising above all of it, seeing the whole forest for what the hell it is. Because life is too short. People are so interested in the minutiae. I'm not against minutiae, but transcendent truth is divinely simple on every level possible. The absolute truth can never be complex or self-contradictory or dualistic. It's just utterly impossible. It can never be that by definition. Anyway, tell me what you think. I love reading the comments. Thanks so much for watching, and have a good week. Lux Evertas.